After completing their professional assignment for Calcutta magazine, two photojournalists, Ted and Marjorie, enjoy a quiet moment in their tent. Outside, their local guides tend to the horses, but the animals grow restless, sensing something unseen lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, panic erupts, the horses bolt, and the locals scramble to regain control. One man stays behind, unaware of the horror approaching. From the darkness, a guttural growl shatters the night. A monstrous beast emerges and strikes swiftly, tearing into the lone local. Ted barely has time to react before the werewolf lunges at Marjorie. She screams as claws sink into her flesh. Ted is thrown aside, his shoulder injured, slamming into the ground in agony. Paralyzed with pain, he watches helplessly as Marjorie's cries fade into the night. The beast turns to Ted, its fangs bared, ready to finish him. But in a last desperate act, Ted grabs a shotgun lying nearby. With a thunderous blast, he blows the creature's head apart, but the horror has only begun, because Ted has been bitten. The scene shifts to a small town in Oregon, where a young boy, Brett, plays with his dog, Thor. Suddenly, their peaceful moment is interrupted by the arrival of an unknown man, and Thor steps forward to protect his owner. The man is impressed by the dog, but just then, Brett's mother, Janet, arrives on the scene. The man pretends to be a salesman from a reading foundation, offering books, but Janet isn't interested. The man slyly provokes Thor into attacking him, and after Janet commands Thor to back off, the man claims to have been bitten. He threatens to sue them, unaware that Janet herself is a lawyer. Sensing the drama, Janet sarcastically calls him Flopsy. When Brett asks, Janet explains that Flopsy is a scam artist who throws himself in front of cars or provokes dogs into attacking him, then pretends to be injured in order to extort money. She warns him, making it clear that he should leave immediately. At night, a park ranger is seen working on late night shift when he hears some growling noises. At first he ignores them, but as the monster closes in, the man rushes away. Eventually, he stops to gather his breath, but then the werewolf attacks and kills him brutally. Later, Janet receives a call from her brother, Ted, informing her about his return from the assignment. Janet is excited and agrees to meet him within a few hours. She takes Brett and Thor to Ted's location. Upon arrival, Thor eagerly rushes to greet his old friend. Ted meets them warmly, expressing how happy he is to see them. Meanwhile, Thor sniffs the air, acting strangely. Ted watches suspiciously as Thor runs into the forest. He leads Janet and Brett inside his airstream, and they begin catching up. Ted talks to Janet about her recent move to the small town, and she shares that she's enjoying her new life, both her job and the peaceful environment. Ted hugs her, appreciating her for balancing her career as a full-time lawyer and her role as a mother to Brett. Janet senses the tension and asks Ted about it. Ted admits that life has been difficult since Marjorie left him, and now he's all alone. Meanwhile, Brett comes across a book titled The Lore of Werewolves and is shocked by the disturbing images inside. Thor continues following the trail and eventually stumbles upon the remains of a dead park ranger. When Thor returns to Brett, he's startled and quickly puts the book back in its place. Janet and Ted return soon after, and Ted calls Thor to come to him, but Thor hesitates, sensing something off about Ted. Janet dismisses Thor's behavior, calling him overprotective, but Thor cautiously moves closer to Ted. A few hours later, Ted asks Janet and Brett to leave so they can get home before bedtime. A few days pass, and Ted calls Janet to thank her for the visit. He seems anxious, and when Janet asks about his unease, he looks out the window to see police surrounding the area. He lies, telling Janet he'll visit them soon. Upon hearing this, Thor grows uneasy, sensing impending danger. Later, Ted arrives at Janet's place, and the siblings seem happy to reconnect. While they chat, Thor snoops through Ted's things, and Janet notices a handcuff. She picks it up, joking about it, but her comment seems to make Ted uncomfortable. Before she can leave, Ted asks for permission to go for a run later and keep a low profile at night. That evening, Thor watches Ted leave for his jog and begins barking, catching Janet's attention. Sensing Thor's tension, Janet lets him outside. Thor rushes into the woods and eventually finds Ted, now transformed into a werewolf, chained to a tree. The werewolf glares at Thor with fury, but Janet calls Thor back and forces him to return home. The next morning, Brett tries to play with Thor, but the dog rushes to Ted's airstream and urinates on its tire. Meanwhile, Janet watches the news and learns of the death of a fifth hiker, killed by an unknown animal in the same area where Ted has been living. She hears about the curfew and begins to feel anxious. Suddenly, Ted emerges and notices the urine on his tires. As he glares at Thor, Brett quickly pulls him away. Janet then approaches Ted, telling him what she heard on the news. She demands answers for keeping it a secret, but Ted lies, claiming he was planning to tell her. Janet leaves, telling him to stay until the curfew ends. As she prepares breakfast, Ted joins her, and they watch a movie showing a werewolf transformation. Ted bursts out laughing, and when asked, he explains that it's the full moon part of werewolf movies that amuses him. Brett is confused and dismisses the conversation, saying werewolves aren't real. Janet sends Brett to take out the trash, after which Ted approaches her, asking about the mess Thor caused last night. She explains the barking, while Ted appears concerned, fearing that Thor may have led her to something. Janet reassures him that was nothing unusual last night. Ted warns her to be cautious, mentioning that animals tend to move away once they deplete the resources in a particular area. He brings up the wolves in his vicinity that killed the hikers and advises Janet not to let Brett play outside for a while. Later that evening, Ted prepares to leave for his jog but finds Thor waiting for him. Ted retreats to his airstream, keeping an eye on Thor, hoping the dog will leave, but it doesn't. Running out of time, Ted attempts to leave, only for Thor to follow him. With no other choice, Ted calls Janet, asking her to take the dog away. At night, Brett notices Thor trying to leave the house and opens the door for him. Thor heads to the forest, but this time, he doesn't find the werewolf in handcuffs. Thor quickly returns home and finds Ted there. The werewolf, irritated by the dog, lunges at him. The two struggle with each other when Janet hears the noise and turns on the lights, scaring the werewolf away. She finds Thor injured and takes him inside. She treats Thor's wounds and contacts the sheriff while Thor joins Brett, ensuring he's secured. Janet then heads to see Ted but finds his airstream empty. She accidentally stumbles upon Ted's diary. Horrified, she sees mutilated pictures of Marjorie. She reads through Ted's entries about his attempts to find a cure for his disease. The diary describes numerous incidents of Ted blacking out at night, waking up covered in blood the next morning. Eventually, Janet comes across the latest entries, where Ted confesses that he came to them, hoping the love of family could send the infection into remission. Terrified, Janet leaves the airstream. Later, Flopsy returns to seek revenge on Thor. As he approaches the doghouse, intending to kill Thor, the werewolf appears behind him and ruthlessly kills him. The next day, the sheriff visits Janet. After showing him Flopsy's photo, he delivers the news of his death by an animal the previous night. Mentioning Flopsy's earlier encounter with Thor, the sheriff assumes that Thor must have killed him after Flopsy tried to break in. Janet supports his theory, stating that Thor fought something or someone last night. The sheriff cuts the conversation short and, before leaving, warns Janet that once a dog tastes human blood, he becomes dangerous. After the sheriff leaves, Janet approaches Thor and lets him outside. When Ted steps out and stares at the dog, Janet arrives. She questions Ted about being out all night, but Ted provokes Thor. Thor attacks Ted and bites his arm, injuring him badly. Janet barely manages to get him inside and locks him in a room. After a while, she takes Ted out and hands him over to the animal control officers. They force him out of the house, and suddenly, Brett arrives, crying, which complicates the situation further. Ted joins in and cunningly waves goodbye to Thor. Later they're having lunch when Brett seems off. Ted comments that it's in the genetics of German shepherds, but Brett replies that Thor is pedigreed and doesn't act like that. Watching Ted in pain, Janet asks him to visit a doctor, but he refuses. After the meal, Janet stops Ted and asks him to be honest about something. Ted promises, but when she asks about Marjorie, Ted lies, claiming she is in Seattle. Janet becomes scared. That night, Brett sneaks out of his room, jumps off the roof, and leaves the house on his bicycle. Meanwhile, Janet secretly watches Ted leave for his run and decides to follow him. She picks up her gun to be cautious but ultimately declines. She continues to follow Ted and wanders around the forest. At the same time, Brett arrives at the animal control facility to rescue Thor. Janet arrives in the forest, catching Ted in the midst of trying to restrain himself. Sensing her presence, Ted seethes with anger, accusing her of ruining his private affair. He mentions the dog, claiming it was trying to protect them. Ted insists he was ready to leave, but Janet, trying to be the good sister, stopped him. Now, she will pay the price as he slowly transforms into a werewolf. Meanwhile, Brett finds Thor locked in the cage and quickly frees him. Thor dashes toward the animal pound's door, but it's locked. Finding another way out, he bolts toward the house, with Brett trailing behind him. As Ted fully transforms, Janet sprints back toward home. She rushes to reload her revolver, but Ted breaks in, hellbent on killing her. Barely managing to avoid his savage attacks, Janet makes her way to Brett's room, only to find it empty. Suddenly, Ted crashes through the door, shoving her aside, causing her to drop her gun. Just as Ted is about to finish her off, Thor charges in from behind, attacking Ted with all his might. The two engage in a brutal fight, but Ted overpowers Thor, knocking him out temporarily, giving Janet the chance to grab her gun. Just then, Brett arrives, and Ted seizes him. Desperate, Janet opens fire on Ted, unloading the entire magazine into him. Ted staggers, struggling to keep control, but before he can retaliate, Thor regains consciousness and shoves him through the window. Ted and Thor crash to the ground. Ted, barely conscious, stumbles into the forest. The next morning, Thor finds Ted in human form, badly injured. Ted gazes up at Thor, pleading for him to end it all. Without hesitation, Thor lunges at him. As things return to normal, Janet expresses her gratitude to Thor for saving them. But before she can fully process the moment, Thor begins to transform into the beast once again. In shock, Janet jolts awake, realizing it was all just a dream. She quickly comforts Brett, assuring him that everything is okay. The movie ends with the two of them gently petting Thor,